Everyone. The Honorable, the Head of Law Study Program, Dr. Maskun S.A. LL.M. The Honorable Dean College of Law, National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Republic of China, Professor I-Ming Liao, LL.B, M.Sc, Ph.D, sorry for the wrong spelling. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the guest lecture, Series 4, Transitional Justice and Regression of Democracy in Taiwan, some reflection on the practices of Vindictive Legislation. First of all, let us send our gratitude to the Almighty God for His greatness and blessings, so we can all gather virtually in this occasion, despite the current global pandemic of COVID-19. My name is Normiati, and I will be the MC of the webinar. The first agenda is a webinar report delivered by the Head of Law Study Program, Dr. Maskun S.H. LL.M, and as well as to officially open the webinar. To Mr. Dr. Maskun S.H. LL.M, time is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for Ms. Nomi for this opportunity. While we waiting Ibu Dekan, our Dean Prof. Farida, to open officially this guest lecture this afternoon. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Dean, Faculty of Law, Hasanuddin University, Professor Dr. Farida Patitinggi, SHM, the Honorable Dean, College of Law, National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Republic of China, Prof. I-Ming Liao, Ph.D., the Honorable Moderator, Committee, and all students who attend these lectures this afternoon. First of all, let me express my gratitude to Prof. I-Ming Liao for giving a guest lectures. As we know, the guest lectures activity are in agenda every semester in legal study program in this faculty, which is in this year, 2022, we will do it more intensively by presenting several features and issues for the next guest lectures. And also we hope that guest lectures will be a bridge of knowledge and also the network enhancement for both faculty in advance. And then finally, let me thanks also to the Dean of Faculty of Law for trusting the legal study program bachelor degree, of course, to present these lectures, as well as the committee, Dr. Kadarudin. Thank you so much, Mike, and the team to prepare this event happening this afternoon. I think that's all my greetings to these guest lectures. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I return to the MC.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Maskun S.L.M. And now we will proceed to our main agenda, that is the guest lecture on Transitional Justice and Regression of Democracy in Taiwan, some reflections on the practices of Vindictive Legislation. The lecture and the discussion will be guided by our moderator, Pak Dr. Kadarudin S.H. M.A. LCLA. Dr. Kadarudin is the lecturer from the Department of International Law of Faculty of Law of Hasanuddin University. Without further ado, I pass the floor to the moderator, Pak Dr. Kadarudin S.H. M.A. Time is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, the Honorable Dean of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Hasanuddin, Ibu Profesor Dr. Farida Patitinggi SHM, the Honorable Head of Legal Study Program, Faculty of Law, Universitas Hasanuddin, Bapak Dr. Maskun SHLM, the Honorable Speaker, Professor I-Ming Liao, Ph.D., Dean College of Law, National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Republic of China, my respectable audience of this guest lecture. The fact that many of you have allocated your time this Wednesday afternoon to be here serves as a reminder to us all just how important our work here is to bridge global awareness on the issues of the transitional justice and regression of democracy in Taiwan, some reflection on the practice of vindictive legislation. This moment is very happy for us because I can meet all of you in this scientific activity, even though via virtual. I'm Dr. Kadarudin, the moderator who will guide in this session. Transitional justice is a political concept used rhetoric for making terminal peace and democracy consolidation by letting people remember the injustice and tragedy caused by authoritarianism. But in Taiwan, some recent legislative action under the plea of transnational justice would break the foundation of rule of law and further make democracy regress as a concept accepted by most of the political elites. Why its practice could jeopardize democracy and rule of law? To discuss this question, let's look at the presentation that will be delivered by Professor Liao. I invite Professor Liao to deliver her presentation. The title Transitional Justice and Regression of Democracy in Taiwan, some reflection on the practice of vindictive legislation. Before that, I will read his CV first. Professor I-Ming Liao, Ph.D. is Dean of the College of Law, the National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Republic of China, and successfully created innovative legal education program. He completed the study master in social science 1994 to 1997, and PhD in political science 1997 to 2001 at the National Taiwan University, Taipei, Taiwan. Problem solving and communication, leading a scholar at innovative legal education program, establish and promote Taiwan General Rural Communities Covenant, and conducted literature review of legislative and legal issues and development. Professor tenure 2001 until now, National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan. Visiting professor, University of Osnabrück, Germany in 2016. Lecture in 1999 until now. National Taipei University of Education, Taipei, Taiwan. Language Mandarin native, English fluent, German conversational. To Professor I-Ming Liao, time's yours.
Okay, so now is the time for me to talk about the transitional justice, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So,
Okay.
could everybody hear my voice?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
clear.
Okay. Now I will start it. Transitional justice is a very important concept at politics and legal at Taiwan after recent 2 decades. Although there is no world war, no war at global village, no war between mainland China and Taiwan, terrorist attacks and religious conflicts around the world cause everybody re-emphasize that old vital question: how to prevent war by establishing and keeping well legal system. When talk about preventing war and keeping peace in formal and legal way, transitional justice has been a fashion word both in practices and academic fields. In Taiwan, transitional justice raised again and again along with the party of the nation. Due to the civil war and authoritarian history, the transitional justice always been used as a rhetoric for the new party to attack old party, for the politicians to raise an issue that could cause some media influential. The most recent party of the nation at Taiwan was 2016, when the DDP successfully defeated KMT and get the authority to hold executive parliament and attack the majority in parliament. legislative yuan. After that, DDP government proposed some policies under the rhetoric of transitional justice and had caused a lot of conflicts in Taiwan politics and society. Most of those conflicts about transitional justice policies are only nonsense political drama and that are not worthy of discussing them at international academic forum. But some legislative action under the policy of practicing transitional justice have been serious damage the foundation of democracy and rule of law system of Taiwan. Is very important for international academic discussion because it could give us a critical example in researching the democratic consolidation and regression. Transitional justice is an idea that for the purpose of keeping people to remember the vice of authoritarian and so to prevent it happen again. But according to some reflections about recent Taiwan transitional justice practices, some kind of legislative action which was clearly focused on to realize transitional justice would damage the foundation of democratic and rule of law system serious but without manifest symptom. Legislative action through democratic due process that hampered democracy in Latin way are the most critical root of democratic regression. How could transitional justice ideas make democracy regression with legislative action? To discuss this is the lecture that I give now. My lecture will first discuss the origin of democracy regression from practical lawmaking perspectives, and to identify characteristics of vindictive legislation illustrated by Taiwan recently relations. Then this lecture will identify three major characteristics of vindictive legislation. First, vindictive legislation regarding correctly punishing perpetrators as practicing the transitional justice ideal. So it is welcomed by any opposite parties at the present politics and could also easily cover up majority bias. Second, in order for correctly punishing those who commit injustice, vindictive legislation tend to delegate coercive power to administrative agency without hesitation, and the power that delegated usually only rule out by law, but not by law, but political power. Third, vindictive legislation could easily bring material for or spiritual interest to those who suffered injustice at past, as well as the ruling party. So they will have strong incentives for the ruling party to copy it again and again. At last, my lecture will argue that these three characteristics make the vindictive legislation a danger tool for ruling party to regress democracy. And now we're talking about democracy regression. The general condition of democracy always been regarded as majority rule through fair and regular elections and laws. But even the majority could take authority legally and rule by law. Without self-restraint, democracy may still in danger. If the majority take the authority and then reject to self-restraint and follow the rule of law, in this lecture, I will regard it as democracy regression. In the whole world, freedom and democracy had regressed to the worst grade during these 40 years at about 2010. In Africa, development failed. In China, Russia, and also some South Korea, the government threat to human rights and freedom were more and more seriously. Philippines Schmitter had correctly said, democracy is not surely going to consolidation, but turn into other kind of authoritarian. What kinds of governance the democratic system will transform depends on the way it came from and also the way it rules. So when democratic system wish to go to consolidation, not only had to protect it from outside attack, but also from inside collapse. And the inside collapse of democratic system always starts from the elected majority government force its policies that have been a series of promises to constituents without strictly observed the rule of law. Compared to the spirit of constitution and the rule of law, promise of majority of people have been regarded as much more important at this time. The discretional power to delegate from the parliament will be no boundary and limits. The majority ruling that will willing to set no limit to administrative discretional power is under a special condition. That is, according to what happened recently in Taiwan, vindictive legislation under the plea of transitional justice rhetorics would easily avoid questions that about legality and justification of unlimited administrative discretional power. Now we talk about transitional justice and vindication. Transitional justice is a kind of justice emphasizing on correcting injustice action which were justified by political right and authoritarian past, but causes serious damages to some people. Democratic government reviewed honestly all those actions done by its past leaders and officers that violate natural law or damage human rights seriously. By prosecuting those wrongly doers and compensate the victims, democratic government swear to all citizens that the human right will not be violated anymore under any kind of reason or based on any forms of political right. Scholars and thinkers believe that by recovering all criminal actions at the past could let people knowing it's wrong and learning how to prevent. Political actors claim that to punish the past wrongdoers will bring comfort to victims and their families. And further, they believe that victims' comfort is the basis of internal social peace. Concluding the above ideas, transitional justice in practice always includes three major words. That is, to investigate the truth about the past injustice, government formal apologize and compensation to victims, and prosecuting and punishing injustice doers. In practical perspective, transitional justice must be justice in delayed. Such delayed justice not only will be easily accepted by elites of political forum, it also hard to be questioned when the ruling party want to accelerate. So in political reality, few will doubt if transitional justice will utilize illegal way so that cause new injustice. But in Taiwan, recent legislation, there were some legislative acts that were under the plea of carrying injustice of transitional justice have now rooted in authoritarian seeds in Taiwan's young and flat democratic soil. And those legislative acts have their common features, that is, justified vindication. the legislative acts that major purpose are to justify the retaliatory measures could be identified in this article as vindictive legislation. At the following section, I will identify vindictive legislation by comparing to ordinary legislation in three aspects. The first is goal setting. The second is enforced techniques. And then last is benefits parties. The first, let's talk about the goal setting. I want to say that the goal setting is using the punishing as governing. When the government proposed a legislative act that is vindictive content, it must highlight a special governing ideas. That is, to punishing the bad guys. It is the best and even only effective way of governance. Compared to other forms of governance, punishment governance taking the governing purpose as much more easily and simple. It thought the social problem that government has to solve is only caused by those who did something wrong or bad. To punish them rightly, the problem will be solved and justice will be done. So when the bad guys who did the very wrong things and past are easily to identify, and what they have done were more easily to be judged as wrong, then the punishment governance idea will be much more easily than any other kind of governance being supported at political showing stage. For when talk about justice at the political arena, an eye for an eye, blood for blood is being regarded as more welcome to the whole society. Politicians know how to avoid risk and capture one's own political interest from issues that are less disputable. To punish the well-known murders, slaughterous and past politics, to let the victims and the whole society could have an outlet to blow off steam is always a good rhetoric to win acclamation at a political exhibition. Second, we talk about the techniques of governing. That is why I talk about experts without checking. After making sure that there are murderers and criminals to punish, and to punish them is the right at current politics, then politicians have to let punishment be properly done. The first step of proper punishment is to investigation of truth, the truth that most people, especially politicians, have already their presumed judgment. But politician knows, just because most people have their presumed judgment about the past history, more investigation for finding out the evidence to prove most people's presumed judgment is right will make the punishing governance more acceptable and unquestionable. So, delegate authority to some court experts that have special privilege to interpret the meaning of truth will be no more better policy to practice transitional justice. But who could be qualified as experts? And their objective criteria is to review the qualification. These two qualified questions could only be answered by political process. First, about qualification of the experts. In common sense, it is historical scholar, especially those scholars that are majored in the study of injustice period, are better. But even there surely are some historical scholars who are really measuring the study of injustice period. Not all those scholars could be qualified and elected as experts, their own privilege to interpret thousands of historical papers or stuffs and making sure the truth, even though they may have written some researching papers about injustice period. Maybe only those scholars with the right thought, the attitude so could be helpful for government to fulfill transitional justice policies could be the real expert for investigation, the historical truth, and the interpreting them to meet the policy of government or ruling party. So due to the reality of choosing experts for investigating truth, the criteria for experts is having the right will and skill to interpreting history for meeting the transitional justice policies. After gathering a group of experts, the transitional justice government needs to give them enough authority and power to investigate. For speeding up the works and declaring the determination of government to seek the whole truth of injustice past. Transitional justice government always give those experts authority without checking power through the due process of legislation. At Taiwan, recent legislation give the experts not only the uncountable power to investigate, but also huge discretion power at imposing a fine to those who disobey the investigation orders. Although in the legislation, it is still allowed the penalized unit or individual to lodge a complaint. The discretion power delegated to the Truth Investigation Authority has been a very special, exceptional case in Taiwan's 30 years democratic legislative history. And it has caused serious dispute in Taipei politics, and further made all government transitional justice proposed become political issues. And the last I will talk about what I say is victims present all. Even though the transitional justice proposals have become political issues, politicians in ruling party still regard the Transitional Justice Legislative Act as doubtless. Because at political transitional movement and under the transitional justice rhetorics, victims' need is everybody's need. Victims' interest could present all society's interest. Victims of past injustice are deserving of much sympathy. It could be a consensus among people across races, religious, nationalities. In a divided society, such consensus is more valuable. So for politicians to express one's heartfelt condolences to the family of the deceased is a costless and uncontested way to pursuing political support. For government to mourn for the dead, to take care of the victim's family's life, to express their sorry could also show its benevolence to people in the most costless and effective way. Giving full sympathy to victims is a high-end but cheap policy to both politicians and government. So it leads to an idea among political and civil society that regards the victim's interest as the whole society interest. Victims' interest become whole society's interest could simplify a lot of spatial problems. For example, when there is a racism conflict problem among society, maybe it is very hard to figure out why the racism comes out. But when there is when there is somebody dying in race conflicts, the tear families of the dead, would tell the horse every right. They said their wish will be shared by every rational citizen around the world. So when even the origins of racism, conflict problems are so complicated, but if one families of the dead crying out at TV, news, and dreams of place with pure race and peace, there must have some politician yielding that the gate of country must be closed. So is to say, to satisfy victims' interest is a relative simple solution to the social problems. It is not only simple, but also cheap. For the victims are mere the few minority of people. To meet their needs costs few, but everybody's a process. If anyone dare not to applaud, he or she may be cursed as merciless cold animals by the whole world. Concluding the above analysis, the victim's interest could easily become the whole society's interest and transfer to formal policy that no one dare to oppose it if policymakers are lazy to deal with the differences between victims' interest and the whole society interest. Under transitional justice ideal, few victims' interest substitute the whole society interest. Victims' interest is important. That is right. But if victims' interest is the dominant and exclusive interest that needs to be taken care, then the justice will go to populism. Populism seldom has its connections with transitional justice. But in academic dialogue, it is still an open question whether the transitional justice should have its purpose on preventing populism. This question needs to be answered because it has its dual question in the shadow. Is it possible that practicing transitional justice would lead to political populism? In Taiwan, recent experiences, yes, transitional justice may possibly turn into the perfect excuses of political populism when politicians want to take the advantage of transitional justice by making some policy that causes the few elderly groups' interest to suppress and substitute the silent majority. Populism has known its exact appearances. Most of the time, populism may even propose some ideas that could be regarded as justice. When a society confronts some social problems that were really hard to figure out their solution, then the populist could always give some simple ones. For example, when majority of society become poorer, then the populist will quickly tell the mass that it is because the bosses are all mean and salary they gave you is too few, so make you poor. Populists could quickly make decision that to punish them, to punish mean bosses and ask them give you more money, but law will rightly solve the social poor problem. Or when there were some serious traffic accidents happened and causes many people dead, the reasons the drivers in accidents could not keep in proper speed may be very complicated, but populists know what answer will be popular. So they say it was the mean bus push drivers too harsh, so they could losing the ability to control speed and protect the passengers. So populists soon conclude that only give the mean boss the most strictly punished and hardest regulation on their management so could make the drivers healthy and could protect all passengers. Populist politicians know justice delayed is just justice denied, but it always delayed. So their job is to make the justice be done as soon as possible. So to simplify the question and figure out a solution quickly is justice for the masses. If simple answer and quick solution could be justice, then in transitional justice, they are doubtlessly right. So we conclude that populism could give transitional justice rights and political contents. Okay, let's get into the conclusion. Most politicians never honestly uncover their real faces to the civil society, but they should confront all real result of what they have done. Transitional justice is a political concept used as a rhetoric for making terminal peace and democratic consolidation by letting people remember the injustice and tragedy that causes by authoritarian. But in Taiwan, some recent legislative actions under the plea of transitional justice would break the foundation of rule of law and further make democracy regress. There are three major features of vindictive legislation illustrated by Taiwan recent legislations. First is punishing as governing. Vindictive legislation regards correctly punishing those who commit serious crime and injustice past as practicing transitional justice. Such governing idea is welcomed by any opposed parties at present politics and could also easily cover up majority bias. Second, delegate the experts without checking. In order to correctly punishing those who commit injustice, vindictive legislation tend to delegate coercive power to administrative agency without hesitation. But the power that delegated rule not by law, but political power. Third, vindictive legislation could easily bring material or spiritual interest to those who suffered injustice at the past, as well as the ruling parties. So they will have strong incentives for the ruling parties to make the victim's interest substitute the whole society's interest and copy it again and again. I doubt that these three characteristics may make the vindictive legislation a danger tool for ruling party to regress democracy. For populist politicians could easily utilize vindictive legislation to let justice be done in front of the masses. Okay, that is my lectures about vindictive legislation in Taiwan in these recent years. We talk about the transitional justice practices at Taiwan. What I talk about is some bad legislative act at Taiwan. To me, is very bad thing to see at my country's legislation. But maybe I open to talk about it and I discuss it with you. Could let us know how to protect our democracy. Okay, that's my talk.
Thank you, Professor Liao. Very good presentation and provide knowledge for all of us about transitional justice and regression of democracy in Taiwan. Even though the transitional justice proposal have become political issues, politicians in the ruling party still regard the Transitional Justice Legislative Acts as doubts, because at the political transitional moment and under the transitional justice rhetoric, the victim's need is everybody's need. Victim's interest could present all society interests. Under the transitional justice ideal, victims' interest substitute the whole society interest. Victim interest is important, that is right, but if the victim's interest is the dominant and exclusive interest that needs to be taken care of, then the justice will go to populism. There are three major features of vindictive legislation illustrated by Taiwan recent legislation. First is punishing as governing. Second, delegate the expert without checking. Third, vindictive legislation could easily bring material or spiritual interest to those who suffered injustice in the past as well as to the ruling party. Once again, thank you, Prof. Please give applause to Professor Liao.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We are entering a question and answer session. For participants who want to ask questions, please raise your hand on Zoom or write question in the chat column. If you have problems with English, please ask in Indonesian and I will try to translate and ask to Professor Liao. Please, anyone want to ask? Jika Bapak Ibu ada yang mau ditanyakan, namun terkendala bahasa, silahkan bertanya saja dalam bahasa Indonesia. Saya akan coba translate dan sampaikan pertanyaan tersebut ke Profesor Liao. First question, Prof, from Dr. Maskun in the chat column. What is the measure of democratic regression theoretically? Is it possible to democratic regression takes place in any country? Please answer first, Prof.
Yeah, the question is about what is the measure about
democratic regression,
right? Democratic integration.
Yeah.
The measures about democratic integration. Maybe to my experiences and to my knowledge, the democratic integration could be measured by the practices of the rule in the court system and in the core societies, and especially in the way of government to people. I think that if the government want to practice some policies, and the policies is very, very important to the ruling party, but the ruling party still could use the rule of law way to practicing it. And the court could always check the practices of the policies by the civil society, civil law processes and criminal law processes. And I think that that is the real measures about democratic integration. That is to say, the measures to measure the integration of democracy is how strong the judicial power and the legislative power and the administrative power could check each other and make each power to be balanced. That is what I thought. Yeah.
Is it possible to democratic regression takes place in any country?
Democratic regulation take place in what?
In any country.
I think yes, because maybe democracy has many features at the legal system, but the core of democracy is to respect the dignity and the value of people. If a government or if the majority of society think that to respect the dignity and the value of people is more important than to respect the policy of government, then I think that that is democracy. So if a society or a country or a nation, the majority of society all think that we need to respect our people's value more than government's value, then I think that is so. I think democracy could be realized at all country and everywhere, because I think it is easier to identify that is a country or a system respect the value of people more than the value of government.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. It's a very basic and philosophical answer.
Yeah.
Please, anyone want to ask to Professor Liao? Anyone want to ask? Jika Bapak Ibu terkendala bahasa, silakan bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia. Nanti saya akan coba translate dan sampaikan ke pertanyaan tersebut ke Profesor Liao.
Halo, mau bertanya ini?
Ya, silakan Pak Sohib.
Ya, kebetulan masih belajar bahasa Inggris dari bahasa Indonesia saja. Terkait dengan negara Taiwan itu. Negara Taiwan saat ini kan apakah di negara Taiwan itu sudah menerapkan demokrasi? Yang kedua, terhadap isu yang saat ini sedang viral ya, terkait dengan rencana China mau menginvasi atau mengambil alih negara Taiwan. Bagaimana sikap dari masyarakat Taiwan mungkin bisa digambarkan oleh Prof yang lagi memberikan materi ini. Mungkin itu dulu, Mas. Terima kasih.
Okay, Prof. A question from Bapak Sohib. Two questions. The first one, has Taiwan implemented democratic regression today?
Taiwan has. Could you say it again?
Has Taiwan implemented democratic regression today?
Today, in fact, I feel that Taiwan this recent years, our democracy has been a little bit weak because the rule of law system has been broken by the ruling parties, and some very details about civil rights is also being broken and being violated because of the ruling parties' policies. Take for example, the money we can have after we retire, because as a professor or a public officer, our retirement is the money we can get after we retire has been regulated at the law. But the government, when government want to save some money, they just change the law and make the law to must be observed by all of us. So the money we can have after we retire are less and less, and that is a very clear example of the ruling party to violate the rule of law system. But at Taiwan, when majority of people think that professors and public officers finally should be less and less, so then it is being done at legislative actions, and we could not save ourselves. That is a very, very clear frustration of democratic regression. And so I talk about these experiences to you to say that it is very, very fragile of democracy, and democracy must be protected, because it is always be violated by some populist policy. Yeah.
Ya, jadi Pak Sohib, yang saya tangkap dari penjelasan Profesor Liao, jadi di Taiwan memang saat ini bisa dikatakan sedang menjalankan demokrasi, namun masih terdapat banyak kekurangan di sana sini. Nah, memang terjadi silang pendapat ya di antara para pakar, para aparatur negara terkait dengan kondisi demokratis yang sedang dijalankan di Taiwan saat ini. Okay, Prof. The second question, what do you think about the status of Taiwan in global relations and the dominance of the People's Republic of China in global relations?
Okay. Thanks a lot for this question, because the status of Taiwan in global society is so so unclear. When in a world of peace world, in a peace world, in the world without Russian and Ukraine war, maybe every nation and all citizens in global world think that the Taiwan problem is not a big problem. But because of the Russian and Ukraine war, maybe some people will think that the Taiwan people will be important to everybody, because at Taiwan, Taiwanese people made some very, very important units of our electricity and our 3C devices. And at Taiwan, now it is still a democratic system, opposed to mainland China. Taiwan is a multi-party system and a democratic system and a rule of law system. But in mainland China, it is a one-party system and one ruling party. The ruling party is more important than rule of law. So, but in mainland China, there are many places and many things to earn money at that big society. But at Taiwan, there's no. So everybody in global world must have to think about one question: is to make money is more important than to prevent the peace of democracy. Yeah, is to make money is more important than to protect some people to live in a democratic way. That is the question for for everybody. If you live in a world that has no question about this, then maybe you don't need to think about these questions, because to make money and to live in what kind of society is not matters to you. But when you talk about Taiwanese problem, and especially about the relationship between mainland China, then you need to know that at mainland China and in Taiwan, it is an opposite situation. The opposite situation is that everybody could choose to be respect more on our practical financial interest, or to choose value more on integrity or on democracy. I think that is the real meaning of Taiwanese status at a global situation, because Taiwan has no so-called formal status of international society. But Taiwan is an island that made some very important advances of electricity world. So if the global world knows we should protect the maintain of Taiwanese government and Taiwanese society and Taiwanese system, then the global world need to know that the Taiwanese system is very weak to protect it, and to protect it is only for one reason, that is to value the democracy is more important than to value the financial interest. Okay.
Ya, jadi Pak Sohib, tadi Prof. Liao sudah menjelaskan bahwa sebenarnya dalam tata pergaulan itu tidak mementingkan lagi bagaimana status Taiwan dan bagaimana status Republik Rakyat Cina, ya, RRC, People's Republic of China. Nah, itu status itu jelas pada saat pertemuan-pertemuan kenegaraan saja. Nah, namun di luar itu masyarakat global itu tidak mempermasalahkan terkait dengan eksistensi Taiwan dan Republik Rakyat Cina. Nah, memang sebagian besar orang masih menganggap bahwa Taiwan itu adalah salah satu provinsi yang ada di Republik Rakyat Cina. Namun pada kenyataannya memang sangat berbeda. Kalau di Taiwan itu demokrasi sangat dijunjung tinggi, multipartai, rule of law itu masih dijunjung tinggi, dan filosofi hidupnya itu juga multi kalau di Taiwan. Sedangkan di Republik Rakyat Cina itu hanya satu partai yang mendominasi, demokrasi tidak berjalan, dan hanya masyarakat di sana terkungkung pada komunisme saja. Sedangkan di Taiwan itu multi istilahnya, ya, yang jelas bukan hanya komunis, apapun diterima di Taiwan. Nah, oleh karena itu memang menurut Prof. Liao tadi perbedaan mendasar antara Taiwan dengan Republik Rakyat Cina. Kalau Republik Rakyat Cina itu memang interestnya adalah finansial, ya, keuangan. Sedangkan di Taiwan itu sangat menjunjung tinggi demokrasi. Nah, tapi memang tergantung perspektif orang dalam memandang apakah pandangannya itu lebih berat kepada financial interest atau democratic interest. Seperti itu. Jelas ya, Pak?
Oke,
Sohib?
terima kasih moderator.
Ya. Perbedaan ini juga tadi di awal itu Prof. Liao sudah jelaskan, perbedaan ini memang muncul setelah Perang Dunia Kedua. Karena setelah Perang Dunia Kedua kan awalnya yang pemegang yang mendominasi dan pemegang veto di PBB kan itu Taiwan. Nah, nanti seiring berjalannya waktu barulah Taiwan terganti dengan Republik Rakyat Cina. Namun sampai saat ini masyarakat Taiwan masih mengakui bahwa Taiwan itu adalah negara sendiri, bukan salah satu provinsi dari Republik Rakyat Cina.
Okay, thank you very much.
Finally, we have passed all session. As the moderator, apologize if there are mistakes. Thank you for your attention, especially Professor Liao today, who are a very good presentation. Hopefully this public lecture can be the beginning to seek cooperation between the Faculty of Law of Universitas Hasanuddin and the College of Law, National University of Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Republic of China. Good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I return to M.Sc.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kadarudin. That was the end of the lecture and discussion of Transitional Justice and Regression of Democracy in Taiwan, some reflection on the practices of Vindictive Legislation. Thank you to our guest speaker, Prof. I-Ming Liao, Ph.D. The next agenda is the giving of appreciation certificate. Excuse me for sharing this. The first certificate will be given to Professor I-Ming Liao, LL.B.
Oh, thank you so much.
Are you welcome, Prof? And the next certificate will be given to our moderator today, Dr. Kadarudin M.Sc, MA, CLA. We will send the certificate to your WhatsApp, probably by Dr. Kadar later. And before we end our today webinar, I'd like to ask for all the Zoom participants to have your camera open so I can take a screenshot of all of us together. Okay, I'm gonna count until 3 to everyone to open their camera and take a picture. One, 2, 3. Okay, once more. One, 2, 3. Okay, all right. Thank you everyone for your participation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of our guest lecture today. Thank you for our guest speaker, Prof. Lim Yong, for providing us a great lecture today. And thank you for everyone for your participation during the webinar. On behalf of the committee, I do apologize for any inconvenience that occurred during the webinar. Stay safe and see you in the next occasion. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you.
Liao.
Thank you very much.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.